Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fire Out Podcast. I'm Coach Jeff, co-founder of YouthFootballOnline.com. We're excited to have Coach Alex join our podcast. Coach, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I've been coaching football for probably 15, 16 years now. I've coached high school football, but the bulk of my college career, my coaching career was as a college offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Since I got out of coaching college football, I've gotten into running this Drayson Institute, which is basically trying to create coaching and development resources for quarterbacks and coaches. So I pretty much do that full time at this point, and I'm glad to be here to talk outside zone because that was kind of my bread and butter when as I was developing as a coordinator and stuff, was definitely basing things off of outside zone. So I'm excited to get a chance to break into it. I'm actually normally fairly hesitant to talk about it because it's such a big animal. The more and more you do something, the more and more wrinkles and thoughts come to mind. So it's simple to talk, but I sincerely enjoy it. So if I get into it too much, Jeff, please cut me off because I might talk a little bit.
I'm excited because like we discussed a little bit before we went live here. I'm more of a gap scheme guy, so I'm kind of trying to learn more zone stuff. So we're excited, and I know it's becoming pretty popular on the youth level. So I think it's going to provide great value to all our youth coaches.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I mean, if you want me to jump in, then I will. If the goal today is to talk about outside zone, the first thing I kind of think is really important to do is just talk about what are the different types of zone and how we define outside zone for a second. So if we're going to define zone, there's really 5 types of zone that we could talk about, right? Outside and inside are the two that people are most common with. So if we're talking zone here, inside zone, if this is our back and we're assuming, an I formation or a pistol set right here, right now, right? Let's just go pistol since it's 2025. Inside zone is normally going to have the back aiming at the guard, whether it's inside leg or outside leg. Then you're going to get your outside zone. Now, this is where the term has gotten bastardized a little bit because outside zone, when you were talking to Alex Gibbs and Mike Shanahan back in the late 90s, meant that, right? And then we were aiming one by one off the tight end. Outside zone, with the Chip Kelly at Oregon, kind of morphed into a little bit more of that, right? It went to that flat angle rather than attacking angle. So that's when that term wide zone kind of became popular, and it started to mean wide zone was aiming here, whereas Chip Kelly's outside zone was there, right? Then, of course, we still have mid zone and tight zone, which are less common, but still real. Realistically, when we're talking outside zone for me, I'm talking aiming one by one off the tight end, which I think is a more consistent breed of football. There are some people who will say that the kind of that sweep outside zone that Chip Kelly and Oregon, Marcus Mariota, and those guys all ran so well that it's kind of a high-risk play because it's so predisposed to long reaches on the front side that you get some run-throughs and stuff if you're not excellent at it. And the back is so flat, it's a little bit harder for him to gain positive yardage. You're not getting back to line of scrimmage very quickly. Not that you can't do it well. Obviously, lots of people have done it extremely well, and it's a staple of the modern, kind of the modern college game and high school game. But when I'm thinking outside zone, I'm thinking more in the school of Shanahan and Gibbs, in the late 90s and the Broncos going, just outside that tight end and trying to create a real consistent brand of football where you hear that phrase, put your foot in the ground and get downhill, pick up 4. Once color crosses your face, plant your foot and go. So that's where we're talking today is kind of what some people would refer to now as wide zone, but you could still commonly call outside zone. And that's kind of the beginning point. Now, when we're talking about outside zone, and I'll redraw this to make it a little bit clearer right now. When we're talking about zone and we're installing it, I really think there's 3 phases to discussing it from a basic install process. The first is philosophy, the second would be assignment, and the third would be technique. Okay, because your assignment is going to inform your technique when it comes to aiming points and hand placements and whatnot. So, if we're just talking about philosophy on outside zone, the idea here is to put a lateral stress on the defense. I want to make the defense chase a gap, right? So if I have a 3-tech right now who's lined up on the outside shade of the guard, and I decide on outside zone I'm going to go try to chase his outside shoulder. And chase is a bad word. We'll talk about the technique later. It's really not a chase, but I'm going to try to get to his outside shoulder. What I'm trying to force to do is force the entire defense to run laterally right now, right? Every run along this defensive line and the second level all has a gap they're supposed to be in, right? If this defensive tackle is the B gap player right now, if the nose tackle is the A gap player right now, if the end, let's say he's the guy supposed to set the edge. Well, if I move all these aiming points for the defense, I'm making them chase laterally, and that accomplishes a couple of things. First, it prevents them from getting vertical penetration. That's why vertical penetration, if you get a defense that can do that versus outside zone, that's really problematic, and you need to have solutions for that, and there are solutions for that. But based on the fact that we're going to run laterally towards that play side, we're going to move and attack that outside shoulder, we're going to try to reach that play side number, that puts the defense in a lateral motion, which means we're redirecting momentum. We're not dealing with guys just penetrating straight into the backfield. Mm-hmm. And this is why people say you want those more athletic offensive linemen. And this is why teams will say for youth football, a lot of coaches say, well, I'd love to run outside zone. I'm not sure if I could teach it. The reason they want to run outside zone is because everyone thinks their offensive linemen are too small and they all want to reach and run. And every youth coach I've ever spoken to says their line is too small. I don't know. Everyone's line is too small.
Our line was too small last year.
I have never had a youth coach come to me and tell me, well, my offensive line was really big and strong. This was awesome. I've never had that conversation. But even at the NFL level, you see teams wanting to try to exercise that athleticism on their offensive line and try to get that reach. And that's the reason. We're trying to create that lateral stress on the defense. That also sets up play action, because if you're going to run play action off of an outside zone action and we get the quarterback moving that way and dropping, well, there's no pass rush now because everyone's got to chase their gap. The A gap might end up all the way over here. This might be your new A gap because that guy ran all the way across, and that happens all the time. You'll see the back go down and make his cut, but this cut is actually occurring behind the center because the center's block has gone so far to the sideline. Happens all the time. You see McCaffrey hit that, he's 5 yards outside the hash, he goes downhill, and he is behind the center. It's not a cutback, it's a vertical cut. So philosophically, getting that lateral stress on the defense, it kind of forces their hand a little bit. It dictates to them what they can do. Definitely. Right? It prevents some of that vertical penetration. Now, defensively, there's stunts that you can do. When you start getting that stunt coming in and you start crossing assignments and everything, like that stuff can be tough. And as a zone team, you've got to break that stuff down and figure out how you're going to handle it. As Alex Gibb would say, you don't just fall into that. You practice that. You get to it. So, you don't fall into it, but if you can make outside zone universal, you can run one play. And I've been in that situation before where I think it was the first 6 weeks of the season, we only ran outside zone and inside zone. That's all we ran from a run scheme. And we didn't punt for 6 weeks. And this was coaching. This is when I was still coaching high school football like 12 years ago. And, I think we had 35 guys on our team, and we just executed that one component. We had other stuff we were practicing, but on game day, we said we are not going to install another play until our outside zone is cooking, and it did for the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. We ended up being the number one rushing team in the state that year. So, it's definitely there.
And you know what, too? Like, you got me thinking, a lot of youth football defensive linemen, they're taught to penetrate. So if these gaps are moving laterally, I feel like they're not going to expand with the linemen. They're going to run upfield. So penetration could slow it down, as you said, but I think that's the best reason to run it in youth football, because your A-gap defender is going to shoot upfield, and the A-gap's moving. So as long as you kind of bend them or,
If we're running zone this way, to your point, and this tackle is not going to chase his gap, he's going to go straight. It just
they shoot gaps. They shoot.
And now it just means that the back's hit is going to be really easy, right? If you know what you're doing. Now you have to know aiming points as an offensive lineman. We'll get into the technique and the assignments in a minute. But just philosophically, if the team is not going to run with their gap, it's going to end up looking like man blocking, because the offensive line. If my goal is to get the outside shoulder of the B gap defender, and the B-gap defender sits on his ass or tries to get vertical on me, and I can hook him, well, I'm just going to stay there, and I'm just going to hook him, and it's over for him at that point. And now I can get downhill with the back, and I'm going to end up with a front side hit. Now, the higher level of football you get, the more and more rare that becomes, right?
Because it's a youth football thing. They're going to shoot gaps. That's just what teams do against us,
So you're going to get that hit a lot more in youth football, because these guys are all going to sit in their gaps, and now it's going to be the end just trying to set the edge. So all you're doing is figuring out how you're making that block. Mm-hmm. And it's either fitting outside of it or inside of it, but all this stuff then sorts itself out.
Yep.
If you're talking about teams that don't have lateral movement defensively because they're not great about being gap sound versus movement. So philosophically, that's what we're trying to do. Now, the misnomer on outside zone is the idea that you're trying to get outside. You're not trying to get outside. You're trying to threaten the defense outside to make them chase, and now you can get inside. Now you can
bangs back in.
We're not going to cut back. Now that means that if I can get the front side linemen all here to stretch, the key becomes the backside cutoffs. If I can cut this off here and extend that there, I have created very wide gaps. Right, my B gap might be 4 or 5 yards wide now if I'm really doing the job, and now the back's got very clean angles. The back's got to learn how to read that because that gap is moving, right? It's not a static gap. Like you run counter, once you kick out the end, that's where it is. When the guard kicks out the end, the other guy pulls for, however you run a counter, pulling for that linebacker.
Pulling around.
The gap is the gap. It's not moving anymore. No, the gap is still moving. So it does take a little bit of the back to read it. Which is why when we practice it, I normally utilize a half line drill, which I'm sure everyone does some form of at some point. But it means even high school, college, we're doing half line just like 15 minutes straight. If we rotate 4 running backs through, getting a rep on the left side, then a rep on, while rotating left and right, we might get 30, 40 reps over the course of 15 minutes of them running outside zone to the point where by the time we're in week 3 or 4, it's second nature to them. They're sleepwalking through it. And if a kid hasn't figured it out by then, you got to find a new approach with that kid because he's not going to find himself any playing time then. But that's kind of the philosophy. Does that have I explained that well? Does that
absolutely? Yeah. And I just have one more question. What line splits would you recommend? What's the line splits for your 1 foot, 2
normally
foot?
Most zone teams are going to tighten down a little bit.
Okay. Just so they can engage that double team sooner, right? I guess, right?
If you're trying to get like certain combos, and we're going to talk about this from an assignment standpoint in a second, but certain combos are going to put a huge stress on a backside player. So let's just put up, just making sure I'm somewhere we can see a combo. If I'm trying to get a center and a guard to a 3, and let's say the play side backer that I'm trying to get to is displaced front side, I have a really long reach for that center in order to try to set this up, right? So if I have a wide split there, I'm asking way too much out of my center for him to get there. I've got to tighten my splits down a little bit. Now, truthfully, I don't know a measurement for youth football. I know, when you talk about, college and NFL level, you're talking like anywhere from 1 foot to 3 foot splits, depending on what you're doing. 3 feet would be considered really wide, like almost Mike Leach-ish. And then you get the 1 foot splits, which are really common in zone stuff. You'll see teams that play with it. Like you'll see a team have normal splits, and then all of a sudden the left tackle looks like he's hip to hip with the guard. And that's not their normal split. And it's because, they've got a really tight 2, and they're having to combo that to the second level. And so he's tightening down his split to help him get that reach. But most zone teams are going to have a reasonably tight split. All things considered. I know I've seen youth coaches just go elbow to elbow and just use the bodies as markers. So
they'll put their hands out. And
do
all that stuff.
Some youth coaches do that. I honestly don't know what that measurement comes out to. I also don't know at the youth level how short you have to make that split for another kid to reach. Just because I have not personally.
I personally think 1 foot splits would be where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, if we think a left guard can help a center on a 0 nose from a 1 foot split, then and it may be different from team to team. You might decide, well, I do have slightly bigger, slower alignment. I need a much tighter split. If you're really athletic, you might try to expand the defense a little bit and take advantage of the fact that you got a bunch of fullbacks playing O-line. We'll take advantage of it.
And I feel like kids, too, like if they need to compress a little bit or widen out a little bit, they probably could on the fly. Like if they know we're going to double and we're going to work up here, like if I want to compress my split down or out a little bit to make it easier, they can, right?
Yeah, a little bit. You can play with that. I don't think those are one of the harder changes to make personally.
No, I don't think so.
You tell a kid, hey, get your split from 12 inches to 18 inches, or hey, get your split from 18 inches to 12 inches. I don't think that changes that much, to be honest.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
Because when we get into the technique part, the aiming points will be consistent. When we're looking at, play side or backside number, we're talking about, splitting the crotch with the knee. We're talking, all the same kind of markers that most teams use. Those aiming points won't really change.
Gotcha.
I would say that's the beginning point.
Okay.
So, but again, philosophically, have I done a reasonable job explaining?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
We want that lateral stress on the defense to create, to create a different type of pressure, so we can dictate. Now, if we look at where outside zone then fits into the larger game plan and scheme, one, there is a saying that you can't minor an outside zone, you have to major an outside zone. I think there is a strong degree of truth to that because there's so many potential eventualities. You can't run outside zone twice a game. It's just not. You can't practice it 5 minutes on a Tuesday and expect to run it on Saturday. It's just not that play. Like you can install trap and then decide in week 3, well, we want to run gut instead of trap. And you can you can move the puzzle pieces. But with zone, because of the way it's meant to be universal against all fronts, all situations, you kind of have to practice it in all fronts, all situations, all displacements, all leverages, and that's a lot. So I do think you have to major in it. But if we just talk about building an offense then around outside zone, this is the way I've kind of created a spider web of play calling. If outside zone is your core play, and that's what you are going to invest in, we need to then create kind of an if-then decision-making tree as to what other components of offense we need based on defensive answers. So let's say we're a big outside zone team, and the opponent starts crashing the backside end, right? The backside end is flat down the line of scrimmage, and he is hitting us from the backside, right? What do we do as an offense? What's the next play we have to invest in to solve that problem? Well, then it's got to be naked boot, right? We're going to run naked boot off that backside end to prevent him from squeezing down too much, right? Okay. Let's say the next play, instead of it being the backside end crashing, it's an interior slant. They're slanting the D tackle and the nose to the play side every single time. How they know it, maybe because, like, personally, I tend to run outside zone to the attached tight end on the line, like Tony Gonzalez in the early 2000s kind of offense. So if you do that, well, then you need an answer, because the backside 2 is going to be the hardest block now. That backside shade is going to be the toughest block in the whole scheme. So how do you solve that problem? Well, now you run a little bit of inside zone, right? If that backside 2 technique is an issue, well, let the guard just wash them down, and let's cut back into the weak side B gap and see if we can fit, right? Okay. Let's say we have a team that is just going to stack the safety into the box. They're going to spin their safeties down. They're going to put the strong safety down to the tight end side, and they're going to reduce on that front side, right? So the defensive end is going to stay tight. The safety is going to be the guy who sets the edge, and the free safety goes to the middle of the field. Well, maybe now we want to get into a little bit of counter, right? And I'm a big GH, GF, whatever you want to call it, counter, leave the tackle, right, to help with that reduction. So now we're going to be a counter team, okay, and et cetera. So what are the other things that defenses might potentially do to you where you build that action off of outside zone? So when I build counter, it's built off of outside zone, right? The backfield actions, the formation, everything, the personnel packages, they got to match, right? If I'm going to run naked boot, it's going to look the same. If I'm going to run inside zone, it's going to look the same. The backfield initial step is going to look the same, right? The way the quarterback takes the snap and takes his step is going to look the same. I'm going to try to pair these things together so that outside zone becomes the centerpiece to a growing outwards web of plays, right? That's kind of where it goes. And then you always need to make sure that even if your core play isn't outside zone, well, what is your core play and what are your answers? And if you philosophically, as an offense, build your offense that way, that becomes your game planning, that becomes your play calling system. You know where you need to invest your time then, and which problems defenses can present have been problematic and you need to invest more in. But that's just a way for me to kind of visualize the construction of an offense aside from the true drop back pass game, which gets its own big old section over there as to what we're going to do with it. So that would be kind of the next point philosophically on outside zone is this is something you want to commit to and do. How do you pair the rest of your offense with outside zone? It doesn't all have to be zone stuff. It's like I put counter on here. I'm down for gap stuff. But you got to pair things together. So hopefully the next iteration makes sense. But now I think perhaps now it might be time to kind of dig into the actual zone stuff and start talking assignments and rules and everything, and get into the core of it. So there's a couple of different ways that I've seen teams at all levels of football determine initial assignments. And by initial assignments, what I mean is each guy in outside zone theoretically has a gap that they're supposed to be blocking. So what we need to do is find who is the most imminent threat to that gap initially, and make sure we start with that guy at the line of scrimmage. So I'm just going to put us in a 4-3 defense right now, just because it gives us a good mix of covered and uncovered situations, right? So if we're right here, every guy across this offensive line and the tight end has a gap. The tight end theoretically is in C gap. The most imminent threat to his gap is that defensive end, right? We're calling this essentially because he's covered. So he has got to figure out how to essentially block his gap, okay? Now for the tackle, that's D gap. He's the C-gap player here right now, right? He is supposed to block C-gap. The most imminent threat to his gap is also that defensive end, right? This guy could stunt in or out.
Yeah,
Therefore, he also starts with that guy, and this is us beginning to form our double teams along the line of scrimmage. Now, for the guard, who's the B-gap player, his most imminent threat is that 3-tech right there. So he's starting on the 3-tech. The center's most imminent gap to his A-gap is also that 3-tech, so he's going to slide to there. The guard, again, the nose is his most imminent threat here. The backside tackle, we got to make a decision. Do we want to stay on the defensive end or do we want to climb to the will? For our purposes, because we're going full zone, we're not talking about stay, RPO, or anything right now, so we are going to bring him to the nose. So we can see across this 4-man front, we've created 3 double teams, okay? So the question is, how do we create a rule that makes it really easy for kids, and honestly, NFL and college guys too, to decipher where it is? Well, the answer is covered, uncovered, right? If you are covered, you have to start with that player. So the tight end is covered by the defensive end, so you have to start. You have a rule. The guard is covered by the defensive tackle. You have to start there. The guard is covered by the nose. You have to start there. Okay? No technique or anything yet, just knowing the assignment. If you are covered, you must start with that player because he has to be the most imminent threat to your gap.
Right.
That's the simplest way of looking at it. Second part is if you are uncovered, you now have to help to your play side because the play side defensive lineman is the most imminent threat to your gap, which is what we've already set up. So now we're helping here, and helping there, right? So we have created 3 double teams based on covered or uncovered. We have covered, start with them, uncovered, help play side. Covered, start with them, uncovered, help play side. Same thing back here. Now, we've created these 3 double teams. Some people would argue that these 3 double teams are the exact same block, right? And we're being a little bit overly simplistic, but for teaching purposes and for drill purposes, they're very similar, right? We've got these 2 guys reaching from end to Sam. If you look at this right here, and you look at this right here, you are essentially drawing up almost the same situation. Yes, the Mike's displacement is a little bit further back compared to the Sam in this case, and we'll get to displacements in a second here, and the different ways that we categorize that. But we're basically drawing up the same thing, right? I mean, the guard tackle on the backside going from nose to will is essentially the same as tackle to Mike for the center and guard. Or we're drawing the same thing because it's covered, uncovered, working at a second level defender. Now, the next part is how do we identify the second level defender that we are working towards, right? In this case, it's pretty easy. We can see these 2 are for those 2, these 2 are for those 2, these 2 are for those 2. That part's pretty simple. What I normally have liked to do is that if we can assume a defense is going to be gap sound, meaning they've got a player for every gap, then we want to say is the first uncovered lineman is going to have to identify the first off-ball box defender, okay? That means his combo is working to that player, okay? The second one, if the tackle says, hey, Sam is mine, or whatever term you're going to use, and I'll get the terms in a second for coming with these assignments, he's going to say, well, the second one is ours then. And the tackle would say, well, the third one is ours. So we're just counting back from off-ball defenders, from uncovered to off-ball, uncovered to off-ball, uncovered to off-ball. Now, I'm not saying that the uncovered player is blocking that player. I'm saying that his double is doubling to that guy, right? Because if you look at this, if the end takes C, he's got to take D. If the end takes D, he's got to take C, right? Like that's just the way the gaps are going to work.
Yep.
And the same deal here. If he stunts in, well, he's taking out. If he stunts out, well, he's taking in. Same deal here, right? They're going to exchange in some way, almost like the 3-3 stack, A and A, B and C, B and C, right? They're all working in their pods. That sort of situation is still going to break out. Now, it's a little, again, it's overly simplistic here because I've drawn up a front where we're alternating covered, uncovered. So I've intentionally started at the easiest point right now.
Yep.
But if we then try to carry over these rules to, say, an odd front. So let's look at a 3-4 defense right now. Now, I should also acknowledge that a lot of youth football coaches watching this might be like, well, we're getting a 50 front. All 5 linemen are covered up. Or we'll talk about that, but the rules will stay the same, and there are solutions for teams that have 8 guys in the box if you still want to run this. But just to install the rules, let's go with simplicity for right now. So if we're getting an odd front right now, right, like a traditional Madden 3-4, because that's how kids learn nowadays.
That's right.
Right? Let's go through the same rules. Right now, the tight end is covered, so he's got to start there. Right now, the tackle is covered, so he's got to start there. The guard is uncovered, so he is going to help to the play side. The center is covered, so he is going to start there. The guard is uncovered, so he is going to help to the play side. The tackle is covered, he's going to take that guy, right? The first uncovered lineman is going to identify the first off-ball defender. So this double is working to there, right? We have this. The second uncovered lineman is working to the second off-ball defender. And you can see the gaps align again, right? The gaps align. So any defense that's playing with any sort of normal function, I'll call it, that should align. Because their gaps have to match with our offensive gaps in the first place. Like, we're reading things through C and D gap. Well, guess what? They kind of have to too. Those are the gaps we create. If a team is not doing that, they're unsound in some other way, and it's important as a coaching staff to be able to figure out how to exploit that. If a team is being unsound, and it's almost like as an offense, you want to force a defense to be as sound as possible because it makes it predictable. Right? When you get those teams playing mosh pit defense, it's like, okay, we're going to stick 9 in the box. You get the 10 personnel, throw bubbles until you force them to play base stuff, and then you can run your base stuff. But if the defense is not going to play what I'll call, again, sound infrastructure, as an offense, you might have to think outside the box a little bit to force them to play with sound infrastructure. You can't necessarily just beat your head against the wall because they're doing something unsound and being like, well, they're unsound, we'll do it anyway. You might have to be a little bit more thoughtful than that. We can see here the gaps still align, right? So if we were looking at the covered uncovered as our base assignments, the next thing we want to do is how do we communicate this, right? Normally I would teach to communicate it from the front side backwards, right? So in this case, the right tackle and tight end would be the first guys making the call, okay? And then you normally have a word that relates to two guys in double. So let me for a second here just erase the defense and just talk about offensive words. And I'll give you guys a system of terms that I used when I was coaching high school football like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever that was, and just talk about how we did that. But if we were going to combo specific players, we had different words that the line knew how to communicate. And we had the theme of parts of a house. So if it came out that the tackle was going to help the tight end, that was called attic. If we had the guard helping the tackle, that would be called gutter. If we had the center helping the guard, that would be called cage. Right? So we had words that would tell, the tight end and tackle, hey, we're attic, 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 and they would know that they were comboing together. Now, if one of them said attic and one of them said cage, that wouldn't happen, but if one of them attic and one of them said gutter, then they knew, wait, hold up. We saw something else. Let's communicate. Hey, I'm calling you covered. Maybe the tackle saying, no, that's not a 3-tech, it's a 4. I'm covered. You're by yourself. Does that make sense? So they can communicate this now, right? Now, if a player ends up on their own, we just called that basement, right? So to the example we just talked about, let's say we've got a sandbacker here and an end there, and the tight end goes, hey, attic, attic, attic. The tackle can say, no. I'm covered. Your basement, and so they can term across the front who is blocking who, right? Same thing on the backside where we'd have a cage and a gutter call, depending on how the defense is aligned. Okay, but then the second part is who are we going to on the second level? So the term I would use, I would actually give the quarterback the ability to say who the first. He would identify one of the backers using a term. So for us, the first off-ball backer to the play side, we would call that the king. The second one, we would have called the queen. Right, so we got a king and a queen call. So the quarterback could give up the line of scrimmage, and let's just say this guy's wearing number 55, and this guy's wearing number 40. He could get up there and say, hey, 55's the king, 55's the king. Well, that tells the guard, because he got a gutter call and it was a basement over there, he could say, hey, it's gutter, gutter, gutter to 55. So they're now communicating where they're working to on the second level, right? Then on the backside, in this case, we'd have cage, cage, cage to 40, cage to 40. Right, now you might want a different word, cage. On the backside word, I used cage on both sides, but perhaps we should have had a different word on the backside so we could separate front side center help from backside center help. Like I know, I think LSU years ago used to use slip and scoop, where there are two different words. One was front side, one was backside. So whatever terms it is you want, that's fine. But we'd have a king and a queen call that the quarterback could now help make. Now, I also had times when my center, who was very smart, he could also make that call too. I'm sure everyone saw that clip from a couple of years ago where Jalen Hurts was making a call and Jason Kelsey calls him off. No, all this, like, you want both of those guys to be able to recognize something and correct each other if someone is just on the wrong page, right? So if the center said, hey, 55 is the queen, the center turned around, no, if that's the king, that's the king. But it's like they have a system of checks and balances. You can make it center makes the call and QB checks, or QB makes the call and center checks. You could also at the youth level just say, fuck it. This is the guy who's closest to B gap. Just that's your guy. You know what I mean? That's the guy who's in B gap. If this is the C gap defender, well, that's got to be the B gap defender, right? I mean, that's going to sort itself out. You do want to identify a second level defender, though, because once we get into our block, we need to have eyes on that second level, because we need to know where we're coming off to, right? Someone commented on one of my videos the other day saying, which lineman comes off on outside. I was like, well, you shouldn't predetermine that, because it should be based on, if
you don't know what the defense is going to do.
Well, now it's this. If it's the other way, well, now it's the other way, right? So you need to be able. That's the whole point of zone. You're blocking a gap, not a man. We're not trying to turn this into man blocking. We're trying to find logical ways of teaching kids who is most likely to be in their gap.
Right.
You're still blocking your gap. We're just giving you much more specific intention rather than just turning and going in a direction and hoping someone shows up. Right now, some teams do that. The track blocking stuff where you just turn open, you go. When someone crosses your face, you take that guy. Like, I don't teach that personally. My high school, when I played in high school football, my high school did teach that. I don't teach that. I like to give the kids specific people that are likely to be in their gap. Right now, if we keep digging into this, some people watching may have already figured out the problem, which is that those guys may not stay in those gaps. What happens when someone crosses one of those doubles and switches, right? So let's say we're getting a situation. We're going to draw up the odd front right now just to make this, because I think that's the easiest way to do it. I'm going to draw it a little bit bigger now because we're starting to get in a little bit more specific. So if we have that same odd front that we were just looking at, right? We got our Sam back, our end, we got our Ted backer, and I call it the Ted backer, the inside linebacker to the tight end side, right? If we are expecting the tight end to be baseman, and we're going to go gutter, so guard and tackle, from end to king, right? That's the assignment that we just gave ourselves. What if they start doing stuff like this? Well, that screws up our doubles. That just screwed everything up, right? Everything that we just drew up from an assignment standpoint is no longer withstanding, right? Because if he were to step to the end and the end hook, and then now he tried to climb, he'd be gone, and the tight end's going to have trouble getting inside. We have a problem right now. We're going to play side step to a reduction, and that's not what we want. Really, it should be he's here, and the tight end gets there. So how do we get to that call? Well, there's a couple points to this. One is that ordinarily pre-snap, the defense is going to have to key that some way, right? If you're going to get a reduction, a lot of times that end and that Ted might move a little bit pre-snap, right? So what that means is, if we were used to seeing this, if on the next snap the defense comes out like that, right? We get a little bit of a shift. The end is now in a 4 instead of a 5. The Ted has now moved from head up on the guard to being in a 40 or whatever the deal is. Something's keying us off. Now, in these situations, we should be able to make what's called a gang call. Now, that word is relatively universal. Most O-line coaches at any level of football will know what a gang call is. And what it means is that instead of us going gutter, where it was 2 for 2, we are now going 3 for 3. So now these 3 guys are blocking those 3 guys, right? Now you might decide there's a team that stunts all the time. We say, hey, we're going to gang call the whole thing. We're gang calling right now, right? And now what most teams will do is they'll give a little bit more ground initially to make sure that they give the defense a chance to shake out who's going to what gap, and then it makes it easier for them to step to their gap, right? You don't want to attack it quite as aggressively. You want to let them shake it out. Now, the game call now relates to the back, too. The back knows to be patient. The back knows the hip might move. We don't want to be slow as the back, but we want to make sure our eyes are tracking. We're reading that edge block for the running back, and if that edge block reduces inside, we got to attack that edge knowing that he's going to scrape for it, right? And now the tight end can climb, and we're just there knowing that that's going to be the block, right? The tackle, because we got a game call, knows to expect that front side linebacker to stunt in. The game call changes technique from eyes and feet. Like originally, in this situation, we were going to go backside leg was supposed to split that defender's legs, and he should have been working for front side number, right? He's trying to overtake to the play side. If he gets a game call, he knows to expect that guy to come in. That's a whole different bag of worms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I think we're diving down, I'm going to pull myself back here. I think we're diving down some specific tangents right now. What I'd like to do is just get back to looking at leverage from some of the basic double teams that we're going to see, okay? And that'll allow us to kind of also begin taking a look more at technique and talking about where we want to get hand placement and foot and steps and all that. So, if we think about a double team, and again, we're going zone this way like we have been the whole night, we know we're going to have a play side guy covered, and we're going to have a backside linebacker. So there's really 3 alignments that we could expect to see from that covered lineman, okay, from that covering defense lineman. We could get an outside shade, we could get him head up, or we could get an inside shade, right? Those are the 3 situations we could align. In all 3 of those situations, what this lineman is trying to do is get his backside leg to split the legs of the defensive lineman. Right? So in this case, his left knee should be splitting the crotch of the down lineman. Okay? His hands should be working for front side number and front side shoulder. Okay. So in this case, his left hand should be on the play side number, and his right hand should be getting that front side shoulder in underneath the shoulder pad. We're not trying to grab or hold or anything, but just technically, we're trying to get 2 hands on that front side right now. Okay? The backside lineman is working for the backside number initially. He's going to look to overtake. But let's just pretend we're getting a head-up guy for right now. Okay? So let's just make that an N. And he is stepping backside leg to split that man right there. Okay? He is working for that front side number. He is then going to step and work for that backside number. Right? We've got the same thing where he is now looking to get his front side knee splitting the crotch of that guy. He's looking to take on the backside number. Now, this moment right here where we have that, we have what we call 4 hands on, 4 eyes off. We should have 4 hands on the defensive lineman. The play side guy should have the play side number in the shoulder. The backside guy should have the backside number and trying to get inside the chest plate right now. This guy is fighting to overtake that guy. This guy is going to stay on as long as he can. Right? That front side guy wants to stay on that block. Right? And the rule is defensive line first. Line of scrimmage first. Fuck what this guy does. You have to block this guy first. Doesn't mean we're not blocking him, and there are times we're going to peel off for him. But we have got to get 4 hands on this guy, and both linemen are fighting to keep that guy right now, based on what we're doing. Now, as they have 4 hands on, this is where the 4 eyes off comes in. They're now looking at that backer, right? They're looking at this backer. Now, if the backer slow plays, if he does not shoot a gap, if he doesn't come downhill to fill his run gap, the offensive line is great. We're going to stay on our double team as long as we can. I'm not coming off until you make us come off. I'm staying on this double. In an ideal world, the 2 of us are going to drive this guy back, and the ideal block uses his ass to block him. That's what we want. I don't want to have to touch that guy. I want to take the defensive lineman, and I want to, and remember, we're running laterally as this is happening. It looks like a vertical block right now. It's not. The defensive lineman is not coming at us, and we're not pushing him back. We're trying to both stay on the line as the front side guy works to overtake that front side number. Right? We're looking to get that hook and hold on to that hook right now. He is working to overtake. This is a movement-based block going out to the right as we're doing all this. Okay? So, as that's happening, as these guys flow here, we're trying to just let this guy flow back straight into his lap. I want to take the defensive lineman and put him in the offensive lineman lap as we move laterally. And if we got 2 for 1, we feel like we should be able to at least do okay. At the very least, 2 guys on the D lineman, we should be able to stay on him so that we set a screen on the linebacker if he comes downhill, and he might just come to us at that point. And that's what we want him to do. We want to force him to come to us and make our decision easy. Right? Now, the obvious assignment here comes. Let me just redraw this because plays get messy after we've been on the board for more than 10 seconds. Right? Let's get ourselves back to the situation of having 4 hands on, 4 eyes off. Okay, we're here. We've got that end and that linebacker we were just talking about. We have here and here. We've got 4 hands on, 4 eyes off. Right? As this guy comes back to us, these two guys are now establishing what they're going to do. If he starts working past the defensive end, that's putting the end into the backside gap, which means this guy has to fight to overtake and get to that front side number, and he is going to force that guy off. He's going to push that guy off and look to overtake that front side number. And he has to, because based on the read that we're getting right now, the back's read could very well be that. Because the back is reading something out here, right? So we have got to fight to that front side number, and he has got to climb to that linebacker, and this guy has got to push him off. Okay?
Gotcha.
If we get it the other way, where this guy sits inside, well, I already have the front side number. I got no issue right now. I'm just going to come off and take that guy when he comes to me. Right? Now, we can get more into it where in this case, where he works backside, sometimes we want to force the running back's read, try to get inside leverage on that end and get the running back in there. Like, we can get further into it, and if you turn on TV, you're going to see NFL teams doing that all the time. Like, but I think that's perhaps a step or two ahead of what we're trying to talk about for 6th and 7th and 8th graders. Like, one of the key points as offensive linemen get older is teaching the offensive line to show the running back what they want him to see. Like, if me as an offensive lineman, if I turn this way, I'm showing the running back my back. I'm giving him an aiming point. I'm determining his read for him. It's the offensive line that's reading the D-line. It's not the running back. The running back's just reacting to what the offensive line tells him, right? Yep. So the older you get, the more and more it becomes the offensive line's job to make that read for the back, okay? But for the time and case right now, if we're talking 6th, 7th, 8th graders, the way we just discussed it is 100% fine, and that should function too. Like, the back can still make his read hit there, or hit there, and we've got a hat on a hat with leverage. So we feel good about that, okay? Now, digging back further into what we just talked about a couple minutes ago about the different leverages, okay? We talked about the defensive lineman being able to line up in 3 different places. He could be a play side shade, a head up, or a backside shade, right? So if we go back to this, we could get a play side shade, a head up, or a backside shade. Now, we can also get a linebacker, and we're going to talk about displacement now. We could get a play side displacement, where these two guys have identified that they're going to the king, and he is on a play side displacement. We could get a stack, or we could get a backside displacement. And what we have to do is, let's say this is a tackle, and that's a linebacker. We need to, in practice, set up all of these potential situations. We've got 3 different defensive line assignments, or alignments, and 3 different linebacker alignments, which means we have 9 potential combos. If we want to, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that'll still take, even if we want to make it more complex, that's like 95% of the possibilities you're going to get anyway, right? So if we drop some of those right now, right, we might want to look at, let's start with our play side shade working to that linebacker. We might get a play side shade working to a stack. We might get, see if we can still, let me go over here. So we can
there you go, good.
We might get a play side shade going to a backside displacement, right? Same deal. Now, we could put them in a head up, right? We get a head up with a backside displacement. We get a head up with a front side displacement. We get a head up with a stack, right? And then, of course, we get the backside shade. And the backside shade is the one I want to talk about for a second. So now we get our imaginary tackle and a backside shade, and now we have a backside displacement, we have a front side displacement, and we have a head up, right? So we've essentially drawn up 9 potential situations. I'm just going to put this line here so they stop running into each other, right? Mm-hmm. That we have to get our kids to block. Now, it doesn't matter when you practice if this is guard and tackle, center and guard. You could put a center and a tight end together, and it should function. Because it's universal rules, universal steps, universal calls, and this guy should know what a cage and an attic means, and so should he. So we should be good. None of that changes, right? But now what the kids are learning is how to create aiming points, right? My aiming point, if I'm the play side lineman, was to split the guard, right? So now I'm there. Well, now I'm only stepping here. Well, now I'm almost stepping vertically because I'm already splitting that guy, right? So that's changing how easy it is for me to get my backside leg to split that defensive lineman and for me to get my hands in the right spot, right? Same thing happens at the backside guard, right? If I know this guy is in a front side, well, that tells us a couple things. One, we're much more likely to have that front side guy in the front side gap, which means that becomes the most likely possibility, right? This becomes a little bit problematic now, right? Where I have this guy in the front side gap, but somehow these two guys have to combo to that. That is not necessarily as easy. This goes back to making the running backs read for him a little bit. We want this to occur. We want to force that guy out so he can climb there, and now the back can fit inside of that. Mm-hmm. So we're beginning to teach the offensive line, even if it's not saying this, to make the running backs read for him, right? What leverage can you two linemen get on those two? Well, you're probably not going to get a hook, right? Or this is an unusual alignment and we're expecting a stunt. This is where you got to break down a little film and know what you're doing. But if you practice your outside zone, practice all these eventualities. Now, we've been talking for like 40 minutes here on this stuff. This stuff probably all seems a lot for a 6th, 7th, 8th grade team. But if you start in August and you run doubles for 20 minutes a day against all these different things, by the time you get to September, you're not just falling into the right answer. You've repped the right answer. What seems complex now, and like a lot for the kid, like, oh, this is so much more than counter. I can see it in my head, youth coaches who are, counter, trap, wing tee, whatever their stream is. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things. It's just not this world, right? Saying this is too complex. We're designing outside zone, which can take the place of like 4 or 5 running plays. So how much?
I don't think it's too complex, actually. Like you said, you could just build around this play. You really can. And it's good to practice all these different looks because, one, you never know what kids are going to do. Like on a youth football level, the kids, sometimes they go and do what they want. So you very well may see an oddball look like you're saying. That's not common on a youth level. So I think it's good to, because most defenses aren't gap sound. A lot of teams are just, a lot of the kids just run where they want. You know what I mean? So I think you have to practice these different situations.
Well, that's what, so let's say you're a team that runs buck, trap, gut, name 3 others, counter, whatever. If you're thinking that I want to get into being a zone team, you can replace half that running game with just this one play. Because it's going to function against all fronts. It's going to function. And you think about how much time you take installing 6 different plays across every front. We've got one play that we're teaching the kids to handle on every front. Right now, a lot of youth coaches are like, let's run less and just execute it better. Well, this is what it takes to just run one play instead of 6. You've got to be able to execute it against everything. And you've got to be able to handle it across the board. This is what a lot of teams, even at the NFL level, have gone to. If you turn on a game watching any Shanahan tree, McVay, Stefanski, whatever, this is like 85% of their run game. It's just this one play. I was doing a breakdown on the Super Bowl from last year, so it's Chiefs 49ers, and you're going through like play-by-play. Half their offense is just outside zone. It might be zone wham. It might be outside zone boot. It might be true outside zone. And we're going to talk in a minute about zone lead. Like, it's all wide zone, outside zone, though. The offensive line's doing the same goddamn thing 75% of the time. Yep. It's really, you can really run your entire offense off of one play. And yes, they dabble in counter, and yes, they dabble in other stuff. I saw them run like one lead. But it really was 75-80% wide outside zone, and half their passing game was built off of this action, where it was outside zone play action, 6 or 7 man pro, and then running routes to occupy linebackers. Right? I mean, think about it from a play action perspective. If I'm going zone this way, and I have to get those 2 guys to fill, well, there's a void behind this guy now. But if this gap is moving, he's much more predisposed to chase it. So it's a very strong influence on the play action game. Now, I'm talking about these things in general terms. Like finding the aiming points on some of this stuff is pretty easy. The one where it's even easier, but it needs to be talked about, is when we get the backside displacement line, or excuse me, the weak shade, right? So this guy is playing with the backside shade. This means even though this guy, meaning the front side lineman, is starting with that defensive lineman, it's most likely that defensive lineman is not in his gap, right? Remember, we said this guy's gap is theoretically there. The most imminent threat to his gap is this guy. But that defensive tackle is not the most likely guy. He's the first guy who can get there, but he's not the guy who's most likely to be there. So those backside shades are things that we have to talk about because it's a little bit different. The play side covered lineman is starting with a guy who is not likely to be the guy he ends with, right? So that one's a little bit different, okay? In most cases, for me, I would either teach a flipper or a filly. And what that means is I'm going to take a play side step because someone is going to be in that gap and I've still got to get there, okay? But I'm going to be using my backside arm to force this guy back to my friend, back to my helper, right? So in this case, what I might do, because I have a fairly easy job of getting to that linebacker right now, right? That's not a difficult angle for me, is I'm going to use a flipper. And a flipper means that when I step, I'm going to step relatively vertical with my play side step, but I'm just going to take my inside arm and I'm going to go chest plate to chest plate with that guy and I'm going to drive him back. I'm going to take my forearm and just pop through him, right? And what I'm trying to do is I'm preventing vertical penetration because he doesn't have to chase a gap right now. He can get vertical penetration on me because he's not chasing a gap. He's in he's in my backside gap. Yeah. But for the guy who's working with me, he's way front side of that guy. So he can get vertical penetration. So I'm going to flipper him and climb vertically and try to force him back so that I can get my friend with me, right? So I'm going to go...
Yeah, I think that's real important.
Here, whack him with my inside arm so that he can get to that point.
Right.
And then now I'm going to climb up to my linebacker, right? So it's a much more vertical combo working to that linebacker now. Now, the other ones would be here and here where I can't afford to do a flipper anymore because I can't get to my linebacker anymore. If I go with the flipper and I go vertical, I'm going to lose my play side gap now.
Right.
I can't get there. So now we use what I call a filly. I know other people call it a filly. I'm not sure what everyone calls it. I call it a filly, where now I'm going to I'm not taking a vertical step anymore. I'm taking a hard play side step. And as I do it, I'm taking my backside arm and I'm pinning that guy's shoulder back. So he can't work forwards off of me. Now, if he tries to chase me, I'm going to use him as leverage to stay out in front of him, almost like I'm stiff-arming as a ball carrier. I am not going to let him into my play side gap. I'm going to force him into the backside gap so that my friend can take him. The uncovered guy can scoop with him. Now, as this guy, the backside guy has to know that he has got a very difficult assignment right now. He has got to reach a guy that is play side of him, not covered him, right? We talked about the covered guy working his most imminent threat. The most imminent threat is a guy you're going to have to hook from a backside gap, right? So now what we're looking to accomplish is this guy might have to give a little bit of ground and turn more and get on his horse and try to get to that front side and catch up with my filly. So I'm holding this guy off as long as I can, still working to the play side, while the backside lineman runs and chases. Okay. Now, I haven't talked a lot about footwork so far on this, and that's kind of intentional. One, because it's very difficult to demonstrate in this setting. This is a difficult setting for which to teach footwork. But also because there's a lot of different types of footwork that work. Some teams are just play side zone step, like they just go play side right at it. Some teams are going to bucket step. Some teams are going to scoop step. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and they've all been very successful. Personally, what I have ordinarily done is the covered lineman would take his right foot, play side step that gains ground. It's going to gain about 6 to 8 inches, and its angle is going to move based on where that defensive lineman is. Because remember, we're aiming to get outside his frame because we've got to split him with our backside knee, right? So our angle is going to take us forwards. The backside, the uncovered guy, is actually going to give a little bit of ground, right? He's going to give a little bit of ground and turn and run with that guy. So he's going to bucket step, which means drop his right foot, in this case, his right foot back about 6 inches and open. And then when his left foot goes to cross over, it's almost like he's able to get into a sprinter's position and chase that to get in there and get involved in it. Okay? So that would be my basic instruction on the footwork and my beginning point for teaching some of that outside zone on the footwork stuff.
Yeah, I like it. I like that it's one play that you just build around. Because with us, man, we have a buck sweep session, we have trap session, we have belly session. So it's like we have 3 different blocking schemes that obviously they are somewhat similar. They're all someone's blocking down and someone's getting kicked out. But like, it's a lot to practice. It really is.
Yeah,
so I like having simple rules that you could just build around. Yeah, one play and just run it out of 2 or 3 formations too. Will make you multiple while keeping things simple for your kids.
Well, I mean, we can get into that. Like, I think the cleanest example I have of this being installed, again, was at high school I was at like 12, 13 years ago. And they, very small team in terms of volume, only like 30, 35 players on the team. And it wasn't easy. The previous year they had struggled. The year before I got there, they were trying to get the program together, going a little bit, and it wasn't their best year. So when I went there and I said, okay, we're going to just run outside zone, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to run it for 1 million minutes a day. We're going to run half line for like half an hour every day in spring ball. And by the time you get to the end of training camp and spring ball, we should be able to be good at this play. We might install 2 or 3 other things, but there's going to be a heightened focus on this, and we're not going to run another play in a game until this one is good. Doesn't mean I'm not installing other stuff, and I've made videos about why I think it's really important to teach kids lots of things, and I don't think having 10 plays in your offense is the flex that a lot of youth coaches think it is. Like, you got to develop the physical and the mental. And if you don't develop the mental, you're leaving the kids at a disadvantage. But by teaching this, we're not lacking in teaching the mental. We're teaching something in a great deal of depth. And it's a much higher volume play that allows you to function in all situations, and it gives you kind of a world in which you live, so to speak. That was a phrase that, again, Alex Gibbs was the O-line coach for the Broncos back in the late 90s with Terrell Davis, and he went to the Falcons, and he's kind of the godfather of zone as we know it nowadays. It wasn't Shanahan, well, I mean, it was Shanahan, but it was Alex Gibbs who ran that system. He was like, you're giving your guys a world in which you live. And you say what the shortcomings are sometimes, and what the benefits are, and if you have to live with a mistake based on being in the world, you say, well, that's the world we live in. I'm okay with it. Let's go get the next one. You have to live in that space, and so I think this gives kids a world in which they live. There's a very clear identity to what you're doing, and you can be very diverse from outside zone. You mentioned personnel packages and stuff. At that little high school I was at, because we only had so many players, we had to get substitutions on an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And so I actually ran, I think it was 14 different personnel packages there, more for the purposes of subs than for getting a different personnel. Obviously, there's only so many ways you can do 11 personnel, but me, it was, running a different player on and off the field who had different skill set, even though he's theoretically a slot receiver. One slot receiver was a good blocker, one slot receiver wasn't, one tight end could do this. We're trying to get another guy on the field because this guy has to play defense. Like, we're just rotating guys through as best we can and trying to create substitutions. But for opposing coaches, it was like, what the hell are they doing? They've run outside zone 78 different ways, but for us, all we called was 12-18 stretch.
That's right. Yeah. Allows you to be multiple, but keeps it simple for your kids. So that's what I like about it too. Even like just
after one of the games, he was like, "This was the most diverse offense they've ever seen." And we're like, "We only ran like 2 run plays."
We ran concepts and
14 different personnel packages and 20 different formations, and we did it with a wham block, we did it with a backside cutoff, we did it with an RPO, we did it with a lead. But for the 6 guys up front, including the tight end in that count, it's the same goddamn play every single time. So
yeah, it's a lot. Even just having a formation where you run it to the H-back side, kind of 2-man surface with the H-back, just having him off the ball and the tight end away. Maybe you can go 3-by-1, the nub tight end, and the H-back is number 3. That creates a lot of problems too. How are you going to handle the 2 receivers to the same side? You're going to bump someone out? Got to roll a lot of youth coaches roll the safety down and go 0. But just out formation, and nothing changes for your blocking rules for the kids, really. So that's what I like about it. It's simple. Get really good at a couple things. Like with us, we try to get really good at like 3 plays and just do them at different formations. That's all we do. So this is, I think, it's very underrated and really, people don't know that you could do this on a youth level, and I think you can. You get really good at the play, man, and then you just make adjustments to it.
I think you can. I definitely think it's worth the time investment. It's worth the practice structure to run something. It's also important to recognize what the kids are meant to do as they get older. If you have an established high school staff that wants to run zone, well then you're kind of doing your kids a disservice if you don't, at the very least, introduce it, and even better, teach it.
Because everyone's running zone. Our local high school is inside zone. They'll run some power, They're known for their GH counter out of 20 personnel too, but like they are inside zone. So I'm good friends with our head coach of the high school. When I played football with him, and he's very involved in our youth, and he is a big inside zone, and a lot of split zone too. And then you read the end, so it's like I think it's every height, and then our offensive coordinator on my team, he's also a OC for a local high school here too, and they're more so zone too, inside zone. So I think it will prepare them for like high school too, especially when you start getting 7th and 8th grade. They absolutely can do this, in my opinion. So
yeah, I don't think you can. I think it's the point is I put up a post a couple of weeks ago, which may have been a little bit more rude than I intended it to be, but it was coaches saying that they didn't think kids could handle stuff like this, and then the point was, I don't think it's that kids can't handle it, it's whether or not you think you can teach it.
That's the thing. It's you have to be able to teach it. That's the only struggle I see is the coach being able to communicate it to his kids. That's where it's at. You got to really know, how to coach it.
A couple of thoughts kind of came to mind on that, which is one, there are the coaches who blame their kids. I use the word blame kind of loosely. That was a bit of an obtuse phrasing, but kind of put it on the kids that they're not smart enough to figure this out when they're really concerned more about how much they can actually coach. Then it's coaches who are just recognizing their limitations. Like, I can't coach this because I don't know it well enough. Like, if someone asked me to go to, back into being a college OC, but said, we're going to run buck sweep, I'd be like, bro, I ain't your guy. Like, I know what it is, but like, I'm not going to be able to dig deep enough into that the way I can on outside zone.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the defense throws at me outside zone, I know the answer, and I've got to go find a way to implement it. But buck sweep, that's not my thing. I don't know it well enough. I'm going to need some time to learn that. And it might be a season or two before I'm really any good at that, at least at that level, right? So knowing your own limitations, you only coach what you know. And I also think some youth coaches are sometimes, any coaches, not just youth coaches, any coaches, sometimes in their little bubble. I do this. I'm a wing tee guy, and they don't want to learn other stuff. But I love seeing those youth coaches who want to learn, even if it's just to learn it and they end up not doing it. They took the time to learn it. They made an objective decision. Say, you know what? I tried. I can't do it. Or I tried. I don't think it fits for us. But I took the time to go learn it. At least then you're making an objective decision, not just being closed-minded about what you already do.
Yeah,
I think it's really important to learn stuff like this and just see if you can figure it out and wrap your head around it, and then see if it's worth moving forward with.
Absolutely, man. It makes you a better coach, and it'll help you know what you're looking at on Saturday and Sundays too, even or in your high school game. So it's just good to know as a coach, and But and one last thing is, I think, is that like you could really build an identity around it. Like when we come with our team, like we're Buck, we're going to be really good at Buck. That's like a non-negotiable. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do it out of 3-4 different formations. We're going to be really good at Buck. We have tags and adjustments to it, but and depending our quarterback's ability too, there's read aspects to it too, especially because everyone keys our guards, so we could kind of sucker them and go to it. But but we have a lot, and I've been doing it, running our wing tee stuff from the gun, shotgun wing tee, for so long that it's kind of I know. That's why I'm like with the outside zone. I'm like I'm interested to learn it because I've been stuck in my ways, but. Like, we buy in, we run Buck. Everyone knows that plays us, we're going to run Buck, we don't care. We're going to run Buck, and we're going to run it well. So the same thing with that. You could really come in, hey, listen, we're an outside zone team. So you could really, and you're practicing that. And yeah, we say we're a Buck team, but we're also running trap. We're still running all these other concepts we have to practice. So it's kind of like, the outside zone, if that's your identity, that's your identity. I say Buck is ours, but we're running jet sweep. That's 4 or 5 different run schemes we're practicing. So, I think for youth coaches to say, even inside zone too, like inside or outside zone, that's what we do. And you just go
once
off.
You've installed one form of zone, again, we were talking that wide outside zone, it becomes much easier to install the other types.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. No, you're going to answer a question I was going to say.
Yeah, so if we're going to change outside zone to inside zone, the assignment part that we just talked about doesn't change. Right, the covered, uncovered, identifying second level, the mental gymnastics of figuring out who goes where is done. Your aiming point,
one is a footwork and aiming point.
Changes like where the offensive line is looking to get. I'm not flippering now. I'm set on my vertical combo. I'm working for backside number, not front side number. Like the technique changed, but the assignment didn't. And the back's aiming point changed. So all we're doing is we're taking the exact same assignments, but we're changing the angles. Right. Because realistically, if you think about zone is taking a play side gap. You can't do that any other way. You can't manipulate it other way. All you can do is change the angle at which you take. We said we wanted a reasonably flat angle on outside zone because we were going to say we want the play side foot outside of the down lineman and we want the backside leg to split his legs. We're working for play side number. If I run inside zone, if I run tight zone, if I run mid zone, my aiming points changed. Therefore, my departure angles changed. Where that imaginary board is laying down to get me to my assignment changed, but my assignment didn't. So if I change the angles of the lineman, I change the aiming points of the back, but they know who they're going for. Right? That part's done. So at my last coaching stop, we ran 3 different forms of zone. We ran outside, inside, and tight. The one before that, we ran outside, mid, and inside. So I've always run a minimum 3 as I'm thinking back to it. Even my first job at age 20, I think we ran 3 different forms. My first year coaching college football back when I was 22, same thing. I think we had 3 or 4 different forms of zone there, although I was not a coordinator at the time. Remembering the run install as clearly as I am from when I was the one doing it, but I'm pretty sure we had 3 or 4 forms of zone. And so once you have one in, it's easier to get the others. And they are complements to each other. Like if you run outside zone, inside zone is counter for zone. Right? If outside zone is pressing the edge, inside zone is pretending you're pressing the edge and then cutting it back.
Yeah, that's nasty.
But that's why, like you mentioned before, like your friend is a big inside zone guy. I've always been a fan of the teams that can go outside then inside, because it forces that lateral stress. And when you start getting the teams that run inside zone, they don't run outside. You just get the front side reductions, and you're kind of hosed. And I've been victim of that before, where my outside zone, at a college stop, my first year at a college job, my outside zone wasn't all the way there yet. We were primarily an inside zone team before I got there. The first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, we're not click on an outside zone. We're running inside zone, and we're getting front side reductions. And we're just getting tighter and tighter and tighter on that front side gap, and there's less and less space. And
it's definitely a nice 1-2 punch, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the right way to do it in 2025.
Yeah. And then one other 2 misconceptions, just thinking back to whenever I post zone content, people commenting and talking to some coaches too, like what a lot of people don't understand about zone, it just because it's outside the zone doesn't mean it's like banging outside. They don't understand that it can cut back too, and a lot of times it will, because kids are either gonna, in youth football, this is from what I've seen, from 15 years coaching youth football, big difference high school, college to middle school or even youth. When I say youth, I mean like 3rd grade to 8th. But most people consider middle school 6th, 7th, 8th, and youth is 5th through like 3rd. But like in youth football, teams are either going to come flying up, they're just going to shoot the gap, come up, or they're going to overplay the outside zone, especially after you got them a few times with it, so it will bang back. So people got to understand, it's like people are saying, oh, you run inside zone, you're just running inside. It can bang out, or it can bang back too.
So yeah,
that's I think, and you tell me your thoughts on it. I'm just telling you what I think on it.
Yeah, so I had 2 thoughts. One is that outside zone, I'm always very careful to tell kids there's no cutback on outside zone. It's a vertical cut. It may look like cutback because the whole line is flowing and you're kind of letting them go past you and fitting in behind, like we talked about earlier with McCaffrey fitting in. If you go look back at, like the Super Bowl, the very first play of the Super Bowl from last year, it's McCaffrey. He ends up behind the center, but because the center was going for width, it wasn't actually cutback. He's going vertically. And Alex Gibbs, and if you just go to YouTube and just search Alex Gibbs, it'll come up. He did a great 7-hour clinic teaching the University of Florida staff for 7 hours how he runs outside zone and going through film. It's potato quality film, but it's absolute gold dust for anyone who wants to learn outside zone. It's on YouTube. I have it on my huddle if anyone wants it. It's not hard to find. But he's very cautious to say there's no such thing as cutback on outside zone. They used to call it the Denver cutback, and he would get all pissed off. He's like, look at this play, and he draws the line.
Okay.
And Terrell Davis is going straight downhill. He's not going back. He's letting it's all past him, and he's just fitting in behind it. But he's going vertically. There's no cutback because what's happening
gotcha. That makes sense.
If people are chasing from the backside and you cut back into it, you're going to get whacked. But if you go vertically, you might be able to pop through before they catch you from behind, and now we're good. So that was the first thing. The second point, though, which I thought is important, is that there's not a specific gap that this play is supposed to hit him. It's meant to be opportunistic. Wherever
I mean, the defense
plays,
is essentially going to determine what gap it's going to hit, right?
Yeah, so like when we teach inside zone is going to hit anywhere from front side B to backside C. There's a full 5 gaps that we fully expect this play to be able to hit in. It should not bounce if we tight set the play side tackle, which we should, because of those reduction problems we just talked about. But we can get a frontside B gap hit if we manage to get a hook on that 3 tech and the mic fills A like we would expect in an even front. We could end up hitting A gap, backside A, backside B. If you run tight zone, it's going to hit A gap to A gap. Different play, different angles, much more vertical, much more of a man play, much more of a let's pound it back a goddamn throat play, to be honest. Mid zone is going to hit anywhere from frontside A to bouncing frontside C. We're taking angles, trying to go chest to chest with guys and just basically just setting screens like in basketball. Outside zone is going to hit anywhere from bouncing front side to D or E gap, depending on how you're lining up formationally, and it may be cutting vertical all the way behind the center and sometimes even the backside guard. So it's kind of the reciprocal of inside zone. If inside zone is frontside B to backside C, outside zone is frontside C to backside B.
Right.
We're all the way through to it, depending on where the flow is. So there's not a predetermined gap, and that's part of the reason why the half line drill is so important, because it helps the backs learn to read the offensive line. The easiest blocks on outside zone are the front side ones, because the back can make it right. Right. If you get a hook, the back can bounce. If the defensive line stays in their gaps and you're just flowing them out of the sideline, well, the back can get in behind you.
Right.
He can fit in backside of you and go vertical. Like, you can't be wrong as long as you got a hat on a hat on the front side. The backside's a little bit harder because you got to get those cutoffs now. It's the backside. It's the backside D tackle that, like 75% of the time, is the problematic one. That's the hardest block in the whole play. Is getting the backside guys.
Yeah, and before I let you go, like this past season, I'm not the DC, I was the OC, but we played a inside zone team, a real inside zone team. Like, that's what they did. They ran inside zone, and they ran, I call it tackle wrap, or insert from what they would insert the tackle. Yeah, so tackle wrap, whatever you want to call it. They didn't do that too much, but that was a nice little compliment. They ran inside zone, and it banged back on us so much. Like, they were really good at running it. Their high school coaches was helping them with, like, you could tell. And a lot of teams say they run inside zone, but these guys ran it good. And they had a mobile quarterback, too. So, when our end was squeezing down, they were reading them and just pulling it. So we're like, okay, our end squeezed, this outside backer, we kind of baited him into pulling the ball. And then their adjustment, like, we baited him to pull the ball because we had our end squeeze hard when they're down blocking, and we loop our backside backer, and he'd have Q. Still, it was still a one-on-one against a good athlete, too. So even if he pulls it, maybe that quarterback's good enough to make a play, because it's essentially almost an open field tackle. But, like, and then their answer for that was they would run, I guess you call it split zone. They would take their H, and they would kick him out. Yep. And then that took care of that. Then they account it for the end squeezing. They account it for the scrape exchange linebacker. And then the third thing they hit us with, I ought to put film up on our YouTube and show you, like, this was really good. And then the third one, they ran, I could call it bluff, where the H bluffed it. The kid thought he was going to get hit. He ran right in the flat. We had no one for him. The quarterback just dumped it and boom. So it was 3 plays. We started stopping their inside zone, and then they read our end because we saw they were squeezing it, really working that backside tackle, not letting him climb. And that was their answer for it. So, like, that's kind of got me, like, watching the film back in our coach meeting, and we're like, holy crap. This is, like, it. When you run it right, and they did nothing else. They showed some RPO stuff, but, like, they didn't. They just ran inside zone and split zone.
So if we talk, I don't know how deep you want to get into this, but, like, the issue, not the issues, but the problem you always have to solve when you run zone is how you're going to handle the backside gap. And everything you just described is how you handle the backside gap.
Yeah.
They're all different ways, right? So if we had that little if-then chart that we drew up at the beginning, we can do the same thing right here. And it'll only take me 1 minute here because I know we're making this thing to get to be pretty.
Yeah, it's all right.
I'll go for I'll go all night. But if we just drop, I'll use the same front we were using before just to be consistent. Right, so let's say we're running inside zone going to the right. So we're going that way. Same assignments that we just talked about. Working the play side gap. And the question is, that guy. How do we handle this guy? Because if we're all going to block a gap to our right now, the guy to the left, we can't get, right? So what are the options right now? Well, first of all, I put us in 11 personnel with the tight end on the line, so I've changed some of the implications from what I think you just said.
Yep.
But first thing is, we can do this, right? We can read him, and the quarterback can pull. Right?
That's what they did. Yep.
Right, that's option one. Option two is, okay, let's have an H-back or a tight end or whatever you want to call him here, and he's going to come and he's going to kick that guy out, and now we can auto hand it off.
Yep.
Now we can pretend to kick him out and flow to the flat, and now the quarterback can either throw it, we can turn it into triple, or we can turn it into lead and replace. And now we can run the quarterback and he can lead around. I'm going to come back to that in a second right here. RPO is that. Okay, now RPO, this is all you're doing. You're trading this guy for that guy. Leave the tackle, read him.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the tackle stays on the end. You're exchanging him for him, but you're still saying, how do we handle the backside gap? Now, here's where inside zone and that read option stuff does potentially get into a problem, and I'm sure anyone watching this, there might be plenty of people watching this who are very familiar with this solution, but it's just a gap exchange, right? If you're a defense, first of all, and you're getting a read option issue, you can predetermine who's going to get the ball. A defensive end has got to have a rule based on tackle going away. If I'm the defensive end of the right side, I've got a tackle here and the play's going that way, I got to stay or I got to chase. We can predetermine it. So if me as a coach tells my defensive end, hey, I'm playing against Lamar Jackson, do not let him pull the ball. You sit your ass on the end and you don't take a goddamn step inside or upfield. Do not give him a chance to pull that. Give him a give key, right? Now the rest of the defense can go chase the back. We're good. Or we're playing against Aaron Rodgers. He's 40. He ain't going to run. Chase the back. If he pulls it, awesome. Go hit his ass. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So you can predetermine it. So if we draw this up inside zone now, let's go 4-2 box. Let's go modern football here. So we're just going to go 4-2 box. Right? And we've got this right now. If we're going to give the ball to the back, and we're going to block inside zone going this way, I'm going to predetermine that my end is going to crash for the back right now, based on the situation you just gave me. They're gashing us on inside zone. Make them pull it. Now, if he is going to crash for the back, what does this guy know? Well, he knows the quarterback's about to pull it. So what should he do? He should scrape, right? Because this guy is taking over B gap based on the fact that he's crashing. If we fit him inside, we don't have a backside gap player anymore. We told the end to crash. We're squeezing. He's in B gap now, right? So now send him down, scrape the linebacker, quarterback pulls, and you alluded to this, we're one-on-one in open space against a good athlete, but we got a free hitter on the quarterback right now.
Yeah.
Defensively, this is an advantage to us, right? So we want that free hitter to scrape for the QB, and if we're good, we're going to start him a little bit down, a little bit wider, knowing that that's what's going to happen. Yep. The backer to the side of the back is going to widen and get a little bit lower because we know that's the way they got to run read option, right? Or we've got to make sure that's the side of the two-tech so that the backer can widen, so he's in B-gap. We don't want the Mike to have to widen because he's the A-gap player in the run. That doesn't work anymore. Right? We've got to exchange the end who was the C-gap player, make him the B-gap player, and take the weak side linebacker and make him the C-gap player and scrape and go straight for the quarterback. So what was the offensive solution for the gap exchange? Well, let's take the H-back or the F-back and let's bluff and let's go block that dude now. Right? Because where is this guy going to add a hat? Well, he's going to add a hat over here. Some safety's going to come down, or nickel player, or whatever, is going to play off the edge. Well, we're going to tight set this front side. We are not bouncing this like we talked about on inside zone. It does not bounce. It's not supposed to. So this guy isn't going to make the tackle because he is setting an edge. He is an alley player. So when we pull the F through, he can't make the tackle, and now the F can account for the scraping linebacker, and now if the end crashes, we can pull. So what's the advantage for read option on this? Because this is the Ravens to a T. This is what they do. This is base offense for them. Well, it makes the quarterback's read a lot easier on the defensive end now, because the defensive end is getting trapped coming at him. Now, when a defensive end, if I go back to playing the role of the defensive end on my right side of the defense, so the line goes, the offensive line goes that way right now. I'm the defensive end. Okay. My role when the tackle goes away is I am now trying to squeeze and chase. If I've got a puller coming at me, I have a rule. Right? Now, my rule might be squeeze the trapper. It might be trap the trapper. It might be spill him. I might be trying to get inside of him. If I'm going to spill the trapper, it makes it really obvious to the quarterback what I'm doing, and it takes me even further down the line. If I'm going to trap the trapper, well, guess what? The trapper is going to attack me, and then he's going to bounce outside of me. So when he goes outside of me, the quarterback still has a chance to get outside, like all those naked bootlegs with the bluff guy out in the flat, right? So this solution here for the defense is awesome, the gap exchange. It does force the offense to adjust, and then the offense has the counter punch. So what does the defense have to do now? Well, that safety has got to come down and play the alley play. If you're a cover 4 team, this guy is now the quarterback player. You have just turned the free safety into the QB guy. Right? If you're playing cover 4, if you're playing cover 3, you're single high, you have an overhang over here, he's going to step down and take that. So what do? You send the slot player to the bubble. Now it's triple. You can hand it off, and then you can read off of this guy. You're reading the end first. You're blocking the scraping linebacker. If he takes the quarterback, you throw the bubble at now. And now you're running triple, and it's like 1982, but way better. You know, that's kind of where you are.
We did a good job on the outside, and they didn't show the bluff or split zone at all prior to playing. And this was like week 6. We won the game, but it was no one played any defense. But they would throw so much now. We're base cover 3 and cover 1. That was what we did. A lot of times we show 1, we play 3. We show 3, play 1. Try to mess with them a little bit. It did help. Just showing 1 pre-snap took away their pre-snap call to throw to now. But we're really playing cover 3, so we bail back late. So that would stop the now screen before it even started. But that threat to that now, when they went 20 personnel, 2 receivers, the H, then they had the back here. That's what got us. 3-by-1 was annoying too. That's a tough defending 3-by-1 has given us the most problems. Whether it's me as a defensive coordinator or my last DC that I've been coaching with for 2 years. 3-by-1 is nasty, man. You have those quick throws, and we did a little bit of that too out of a formation we call Diesel. We never ran bubble because I feel like throwing now is a little bit easier. You square it to the quarterback. It's just easier. We were having trouble throwing the bubbles and completing it. I don't know if it was how I was coaching it. We just said, we run a lot of now to 1, 2 blocks the nearest threat, and that was that. But when you add those perimeter screens to the inside zone with the read, like you said, it turns into triple option. It's almost impossible to stop everything. Honestly, it really was. And I'd never seen a U team run at this. Shout out to West Orange. But it was really good. It just goes to show to our point that, to your point, really, that you build around this play. And they had answers. They didn't show it because they didn't need to. And then we were we come out, we do a really good job, stop the inside zone. Then they started reading it because we were squeezing hard. We were really getting physical at that tackle and stuff. We were squeezing hard. So then they read it, but we were forcing them. Like you said, as a defensive coordinator, when you're playing these anything option, whether it's read option or true trip, you can determine what the defense does. What the offense does. If we want them to pull it, we could really give them a clear read to pull it into some kind of, stunt or scrape exchange. What we did, we'd sucker him into pulling it, and then we wrap our linebacker, and we had a good play. It was still a one-on-one in space because that quarterback was good. So we a lot of times we didn't really want to do that too, because that athlete was good. But the kid that was opposite of it, it was really good. One of our good players too. So we were good with that. Like you said, free hitter on the quarterback. Yeah. But they just had the answers for it. That bluff was so nasty. It was they just kept running it a couple times too, even when we were stopping it. They weren't really getting a good kick out, and then one time he just bluffed it, and we were ready to hit it, and it just went whoop right over. And they got a big touchdown to get back in the game on it. So so much, nothing changed for the O-line. These are little adjustments that it's so complex. And built-in answers from pre-snap stuff, that's easy. Yeah. They would do this. That means they're now screen. We saw it on film. They would do this. They do this now to 1, to number 1 receiver, or now to 2, depending on the formation, where they would just turn and throw. So it was we kind of knew that. So we kind of took that away pre-snap. But there's so much just around one play that all that other stuff doesn't matter to your linemen. It's so simple. They were so multiple by doing it at a 20 personnel and 3-by-1 with the tight end nub. Yep. There weren't one play, but it was they had a good answer for everything. Yeah. So it's a good system to build around, man. And That was the day I was a fan, like sold on it. And they weren't better than us. We were league runners up. They barely even got in the playoffs. So,
Right.
but like they ran it so well. Like their double teams and working up to the bag, their combos were really good. And we stacked a lot too, so we didn't make it easy. We made them look on the fly. You know, we weren't showing where we were. So that made it a little harder for them, but like they were so good on it. And I know I'm blabbering on. Just build up one scheme, man, and just get really good at it. And I saw it. And I'm like, wow, this inside zone, there's something here. Because you don't see it a lot on youth level. You really don't.
Yeah, well,
It's
those
like,
schemes are
holy
very
man.
positively systemic, and there's a lot of iteration that can happen off of singular actions that allow your offensive line to be consistent, and then put your skilled players in positions to make simple, easy plays. That's why it's so popular in the NFL now.
Yeah, I'm buying into it, and I think as more youth football coaches learn how to run it properly, because it's not the first time we played a team that ran inside zone. You could tell on the film, like, okay, they're running inside zone, they're trying to, but like you could tell they also had other stuff, and this team didn't do anything else. They ran outside zone. Inside zone. That's what they did. They ran nothing else. We had a one play rep tackles.
You got to commit to what you want to do. You know,
Yeah,
the first thing is the first thing. So.
That's right. All right. Yeah, an hour 26 minutes. Some good conversation here. You know, and you keep me on here all night too. So, if you got anything you want to say to close it out, it's fine.
No, I hope this was helpful to anyone watching. I'm always happy to answer questions and stuff. I enjoy talking zone, but I hope it was helpful. Hopefully, I didn't leave anything too major out. But I think when it's presented to kids, it's philosophy first, then assignment, then technique, and that makes it.
Yeah.
Normally, you would go technique, then assignment in some manner of speaking. Like it's rather than getting specific with your assignments, go through the assignments in depth, and that kind of informs the technique because you know where you're getting to and you understand context. So when I teach the kids, it's always assignment first, then technique.
Yep.
I know a lot of times coaches will build drills where it's just kind of blind technique without context to the actual play, and I think kids learning context is good. I highly advocate people teaching more advanced schemes to young kids and being willing to dive into that rabbit hole with them. Kids can handle more than what we tend to think.
I agree.
And and then iterate. To Jeff's point, if you can run zone, well now you can run split zone, now you can run RPO, now you can run read option, now you can run naked boot, now you can run et cetera. Now you can run wham block, now you can run bluff. You're putting in one scheme to run 10 plays.
Yeah, it was.
So I think it's the right way to do it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. All right, yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation, and probably bug you to get you on here and talk about something else.
Yeah, well, we'll see you next week with our new receivers coach, Coach Isaiah, and we'll do our
absolutely.
Instagram live. For anyone who's watching this podcast prior to that date. We'll keep finding other ways to talk football. So.
Yeah, sounds good.